Hey people, it's episode 35. We are still in lockdown. It's a beautiful day outside. I might evade the jailers and go out for a little walk. You should do that too. You know, how many more beautiful days are we going to get before the snow flies? It's National Lemon Meringue Pie Day, and that's something to celebrate. It's also the anniversary of when Thomas Edison first demonstrated his little hand-cranked cylinder phonograph thing. So think about that, pie and records. If I had pie and records when I was 20 years old, I would never have left the house. It would be all you needed, pie and records. Wow. It's a beaver full moon coming up. What does that mean? I don't know. I think it means that it's the last full moon before you set your beaver traps up on the tundra. And I know a lot of you are up on the tundra setting up your trap lines. So it's the beaver full moon. Also, it is going to be, if you're staying up till 4:30 in the morning on Monday, that is just coming up, you will see a partial penumbral eclipse of the moon. And it's a full moon too. So if these things kind of turn you crank, then and you keep odd hours, and I know some of you keep odd hours, then 4:30 this coming Monday, partial penumbral eclipse of the moon. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it or not where you are, but there it is. It's Stan Rogers' birthday. So if you're not Canadian, you probably don't know what that is. Even if you are Canadian, you probably don't know what that is. But Stan Rogers, bit of a folk hero, bit of a folk legend in Canada. He's mostly active from the 70s to the early 80s, did a couple of great songs, a native son of Hamilton, Ontario. He did the song Northwest Passage, which is a bit of a Canadian folk, iconic song, and died tragically at the age of 33. So, Stan Rogers, happy birthday wherever you are. All right, it is time for the Swan Joyride. All right, things that made us happy this week. All right, Christmas trees. Everybody's got their Christmas tree up, right? It's great. They're getting them up early. They're probably going to leave them up all year. The lights are up. People are taking their festive celebration in their own hands, and they are taking care of business, all right? They are taking care of business, and I love it. My intrepid reporter out in Malton reminded me that the National Dog Show, which is an annual kind of thing that happens, and they broadcast it on TV. It's a big to-do. It went on despite COVID. So there was no audience. Everybody had their masks on, and there were the wiener dogs, the corgis, the wolfhounds, the pocket puppies, the pit bulls. They're all going around the track. They're being very competitive. The little clever little bastards that they are. They want to win the blue ribbon. And so there you go. It's, little puppies, come on. What's not to love about that? Gary, my friend Gary, told me about a cool album by an artist, a New Orleans artist named Stephanie Niles, who I did have the pleasure of seeing once down at Duggan's Brewery, which was a great show. So Stephanie is, as I said, a New Orleans artist. She can do this barrelhouse boogie woogie piano like nobody's business, and plays these great songs. And she's got this record that you should look up. You can only hear it on Bandcamp. So go to Bandcamp, look her up, and look for this album called Uncle Stephanie's Murder Ballads for Kids. Okay, I'm already sold. All right, murder ballads for kids. It's funny, right? So anyway, she's just tearing it up on this boogie woogie piano, and she's got a great band, and she is swearing like a sailor. And I love cussing a bit myself, but she is in a whole nother league. She's out of my league. Anyway, look her up on Bandcamp. Stephanie, she's a Stephanie with an I-E, and it's Niles, Nilles, and she's great. Last thing, Cher. Okay, Cher is saving the life of Kevin, the world's loneliest elephant. All right, the world's loneliest elephant is in this decrepit, wretched zoo in Pakistan, in Islamabad. It is so wretched that even in Pakistan, they had to shut the zoo down. It was so terrible. And there's poor old Kevin. He's an overweight elephant. He's got kind of mental problems because he's lonely and he's miserable. So Cher is paying to have him transported to a elephant sanctuary in Cambodia. They got him on a bit of a diet because he's going to be meeting some lady elephants in Cambodia, and you want to look your best. So let's hear it for Cher. All right, that's it for the Swan Joyride. This week, I'm going to start off with a quote from William Faulkner, who is the great author of the southern U.S. from, in post-Reconstruction time. And his great quote is, "The past isn't dead. It's not even past." Well, this is totally true, and nowhere more so than in New Orleans. Okay, so this week we're going to take you on a little magical mystery dream world reality trip into New Orleans. We're going to talk about Buddy Bolden, jazz, voodoo, Congo Square. It's going to be fun. Hang on. New Orleans. It's hard to get a grip on it. It's hard to get your bearings, eh? It's hard to know what's real and what's fiction. What's a dream? There's voodoo, there's hoodoo, there's old stories, tall tales. One thing you gotta know about New Orleans is that pretty much everything we love about music today, and all the music we love today, can somehow gets traced back to New Orleans around 1900. Because in 1900 or so, a little earlier, in 1895, something happened there. Something changed, and it wasn't like it changed overnight. It was like a century in the making. But around that time, jazz was born and blues was born in New Orleans, which pretty much describes everything we love today. And right in the middle of this, there's this kind of murky, magical superhero character that we call Buddy Bolden. Buddy Bolden was a guy they called the King. He was the king before Elvis. They called him King Bolden. So what do we know about this Buddy guy? They say he invented jazz. He was born in 1877 in New Orleans, or thereabouts. We know by the time he was a teenager, he's playing as a musician. He's a trumpet player, a cornet player, and by kind of the 1890s, mid 90s, he's fronting his own bands, and he is the best. He has the best bands, and it's revolutionary what he's doing, and people are taking notice. So everybody who saw Buddy Bolden has some kind of recollection. Some of it might be a little fanciful, some of it's true, but everybody remembered Buddy. There's no recordings of Buddy. His one of the guys in his band, William Cornish, in an interview, years later, said, "Oh yeah, we recorded one of those little Edison cylinders. We laid down some tracks," and this just drives those ethnomusicologists crazy. And even poets, everybody is just rhapsodizing about the missing Buddy Bolden cylinder, as if, it has some secret, like preserved in amber. If only we could find it, the secrets of the universe would be revealed to us. Well, bad news. The Buddy Bolden cylinder, if it ever did exist, probably doesn't exist anymore. But it's a great holy grail to think about, right? So what do we know about Buddy? Some of his ex-bandmates have talked about him a little bit. There's this guy Bunk Johnson, who is another trumpet player, might have played with him a couple times, and he says he was a good-looking brown-skinned man. He was tall, he was slim, he was a terror with the ladies. Well, that's what you want in the King. Bunk's a funny guy himself. He played much longer, and but I think sometime in the 20s he got into a barroom brawl and they knocked out his teeth, so he quit music. And then the ethnomusicologists, I'll do it again, in the 40s rediscovered him, and he said, "Well, I could still play, I just got no teeth." So they took up a collection, they bought him some teeth, and there's pictures of him playing trumpet in the 40s with lead belly, which makes you think, if you thought that blues and jazz were like two completely different things, think again, because lead belly and Bunk Johnson, like, this stuff is all mixed up, right? And it's all got the same root. Jelly Roll Morton. Okay, Jelly Roll Morton claims he invented jazz. He gets a lot of guff for that. But Jelly Roll will always say that Bolden was the best of his time, and that he was the most powerful trumpet player in the world. Okay, Louis Armstrong said he was too good for his time. Sidney Bechet, who's another very famous guy from that early world, he just loved Bolden's spirit of rebellion and hope. And there was this great song that Buddy Bolden had, which is called Buddy Bolden's Blues. And Bechet says, it was so popular, but it was so rebellious that you could get thrown in jail for whistling it, if there was a cop walking by. So, but he's playing this kind of, the music of the time to some extent. They're kind of military style bands, but there's ragtime music. But he is kind of twisting this around a little bit. He's adding blues. He's ragging it the way nobody has ever done before. And he is adding improvisation, which is something that is kind of synthesizing the African American tradition with the written European tradition in a way that nobody ever really done this before. It's like blowing people's minds. Is going like, what? You're playing notes that aren't written down on the paper? How can you do that? You're blowing my mind. So that's exactly what he was doing, and he was getting pretty frickin' famous for it. He was associated with this area of town called Lincoln Park, which is kind of uptown, midtown, and there was a park there and an outdoor bandstand, and there was also some big halls where people could, dance bands could play. Jelly Roll Martin says, he says, I remember, we'd just be hanging around, doing whatever we do, and then we'd hear Buddy Bolden's trumpet, because Buddy Bolden's trumpet could be heard for like 10 or 20 miles, so they say. Buddy Bolden would just stand up outside at Lincoln Park on the outdoor band shell and just start blowing. And everybody would know, oh fuck, Buddy's playing. We better go. Maybe we didn't hear about the gig. Maybe it was badly advertised. So basically people would come from miles around, and Buddy called that calling my children home. So Buddy would be standing up there, and people would just start coming in from everywhere because everybody knew it was Buddy. It wasn't just some dude on a trumpet. He had a sound that everybody knew. And how did that happen? Where did Buddy get this? So there's a lot of people who think that this is kind of the end game of something that happened in a place they called Congo Square in New Orleans. Is that possible? It's 1812, and there's this dude, Ben Latrobe. He is down in New Orleans. He's on vacation because he's a little weary. He's a little weary because he's the guy they picked to rebuild the White House after the War of 1812. You remember the War of 1812. Yeah, that little expansionist fiasco where the Americans thought, we'll just invade Canada. It'll be a walk in the park. They'll greet us with open arms and throw flowers at us. Didn't quite happen that way. Note for future, it never happens that way. Anyway, the Brits and the Canucks got their shit together. They raised an army and they went down south and they burned the little playhouse down. So Ben's got a job. But Ben's down in New Orleans at this time. So he's walking around New Orleans, and he's finding everything in New Orleans a little bit strange. He's seeing large numbers of people of every race, color, ethnicity, language mixing together freely in the markets. And he doesn't get that. That just doesn't happen up north. So Ben's a studious young lad, and he's writing everything down in his little notebook. But a week later, he's walking around New Orleans, and he hears this big hubbub. And being the cub reporter that he is, he goes to check it out. And he sees 400 or 500 people, or 600 people maybe, assembled in an open area in a park. And they've grouped themselves into drum circles. And each circle has a bunch of drummers, and they're drumming on these giant drums. The people are singing. They're chanting. There's people on these weird little homemade banjos. And there's people dancing in the middle of the circles. And he's fascinated by this, of course. One thing he noticed is that they weren't singing in English, and they weren't singing in French, and I don't think they were singing in Spanish. He realized they were singing in their native African language. Again, this is something that he's not used to, that just doesn't happen up north. So what young Ben ran into was a place that eventually was called Congo Park. Now, Congo Park is a legendary magical place in the history of American music because it is supposedly the place where African music survived. It survived slavery. So, despite all the horrible things that were thrown at it, the rituals, the language, the dancing survived. And, there's descriptions of it. They had, people playing big drums, bambulas, they called them. They had horns made out of cow horns, all sorts of little homemade stringed instruments. They dressed to the nines. They had fringes sewn onto their clothes, ribbons, shells. They put bells on their arms and legs. The ladies dressed up in the best fabric they could afford. The men wore turbans, apparently, which the Americans kind of interpreted as meaning that they were Turkish, which of course they were not. They were African, but yeah, So anyway, it's a big deal, and Congo Square carried on for decades and decades, into the middle, early 1800s, and the Americans show up. The Americans take over Louisiana in 1802, and they're appalled by all this, of course. So they do their best to stomp it out. They're Protestants, as far as they're concerned. Sundays are days for grim abstinence and grimacing. Mind you, the French and the Spanish, they're Catholics, and they're all for a party on Sunday. So how this happened is, New Orleans had a curious early history. It was touch and go in New Orleans in their early years. They kept running out of food. The French landed there and they thought, okay, here's a great place, but it was a hard deal to make a go of it. And what happened is they would run out of food, and since the French were on good terms with the American Indians, they'd pack everything up and they'd head into the forest, and the American Indians would see them coming and go, oh, okay, here comes Frenchie again. And they'd knock on the door and they say, we're starving, can you feed us? And they did. So the American Indians saved the New Orleans colony multiple times in the first 10 years of its existence. And finally, things settled down. I'm sure there were a lot of French people who, figured they were going to grab their attaché cases and their Gucci shoes and head back to Gay Paris or Quebec City, where it was fun. But finally, it sort of evened out. But it was so tentative that what ended up happening is there was kind of a wink and a nod, unspoken agreement that things, certain things would be allowed. So that the African Americans could own little plots of land, that they could grow stuff on those and sell them at markets, that there were certain days of the week that they would have off, that they could eventually buy their freedom. So this kind of unspoken agreement carried on, basically, but when the Americans showed up, they said, no, we have no part of this unspoken agreement, and things got worse pretty quickly. There was always a push and pull between the Americans and the Catholics and everybody else in New Orleans. Eventually, the Americans prevailed, of course. And by the time the Civil War hit, Congo Square was pretty much a memory of old people. It wasn't really happening anymore. After the Civil War, it came back a little bit, but not so much. So what was actually happening there in Congo Square was the people there were engaging in their religion, right? So, and the religion that they had was called voodoo, which gets bad press, of course, because of all the creepy Hollywood movies and Boris Karloff and stuff like that, and zombie movies. But the truth is, it's a real religion with real rights and an organization, pretty much run by women. So the voodoo religion in New Orleans in the 1800s was mostly dominated by this lady, and maybe two ladies, called Marie Leveaux. Marie Leveaux was the queen of the voodoos, and she was a powerful lady in New Orleans. She knew everything. She knew everybody. She knew your secrets. She could turn you into a toad. She had an albino snake, for God's sakes. So don't mess with her. Don't mess with Marie Leveaux. And Marie Leveaux was presiding over these voodoo ceremonies, and basically they just kept moving further north. They just,
they couldn't be in Congo Square anymore because it was getting up the Americans' noses too much. So they moved north, 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 and they still continued to have their ceremonies. And once a year, they would have this gigantic ceremony up on the shores of Lake Pontchartrain, which was St. John's Eve. And at that ceremony, there would be tens of thousands of people, and it's a big deal. So, of course, the Americans are still, trying to stomp this out. That they don't agree with this at all. In voodoo, they have music, as we already saw. So there's song, and apparently in voodoo, you can't have a new song. You can't add a new song to the repertoire, with two exceptions. One exception is you dream it. You wake up in the morning and go, wow, that was a great song, and you can add that in. The other exception is if you're in a voodoo kind of ceremony and you're in a trance and you just like blurt it out, that means God talked to you directly, and that can be a song. So that's what we call innovation. That's what we call improvisation. I wonder what Buddy Bolden has to say about that. So Buddy's most famous song is Buddy Bolden Blues. That's the song that took the whole city by storm. Everybody was singing it. That's the song Sidney Bechet said you could get arrested if a cop heard you whistling that song. That song had another name. It was called Funky Butt. Now, I'm sure you're going, Funky Butt? What? Yes, indeed. It's the Funky Butt Blues. And here's the story. They're playing Union Hall in Lincoln Park. This is Buddy's on home turf. It's late. It's hot. It's jam-packed. People are dancing. It's New Orleans hot. It's humid. It's sticky. People are sweating. People are smelling. Buddy is playing up a storm. Finally, he stops the music, and he just yells out, open the windows! Open the windows! It's stinky in here! So, a famous moment. Later on, guys in Buddy's band, they went home and they just started writing out words to this song. And they put it to music that Buddy already had. And it was basically, I thought I heard Buddy Bolden say, Funky Butt, take it away, Funky Butt, I don't like it no way. I thought I heard Buddy Bolden say, Funky Butt. So if you thought James Brown was the first guy to say, it's too funky in here, you're wrong. Buddy Bolden invented jazz and he invented funk. Anyway, Buddy Bolden went mad. It's Labor Day, 1906, 1907. People can't seem to get the year right. There was a line coming up Saratoga Street, about to join a parade over on Rampart. They're heading towards the canal. You could hear Buddy. You could hear him for miles. You know his trumpet. You know his sound. People knew it was him. They could tell his from anybody else's. So maybe it was just the heat. Maybe it was the crowd. But he hit a note. He hit a note and he held up one hand as if to like wave everybody back. Stand back. And he stood there and he's playing this one note, one-handed on the cornet. Then he steps out of line. He steps right out of the band line, away from everybody else. And he's holding this one note. People start to quiet down. There's King Bolden playing one-handed cornet in the middle of South Rampart Street. The crowd stopped for a minute, and they didn't really get it. So usually, when he's blowing like that, people will call out, hey, King Bolden, play it, baby, give it to me. But he's there, he's hitting that one note. And people are watching, and then they just kind of walk away. They don't get it. It started to rain. Probable that he drank himself to death. He had bad headaches. Something was not quite right. He got to be undependable. He missed some gigs. Then one day, he got into a rage and he hit his mom. And they called the cops. And the cops took him away. And they took him to the sanatorium. And they committed him. They declared him insane. And for the rest of his life, and it was a long life, he lived into the 30s, He lived in the sanatorium. He came out for I think a half a year around 1914. Then they put him back in. He couldn't exist outside the sanatorium. They had a little band in the sanatorium, and the main psychiatrist there, he made some notes. They noted that he was better than everybody else, that he was louder than everybody else, but he wasn't really into it. So that's Buddy. He passed away in the sanatorium. Years and years and years and years later, some dudes got together and they threw a jazz funeral for Buddy. And they walked down the middle of the street and they played that damn thing as loud as they could. And he finally got his jazz funeral. I'm going to see if I can play a little bit of Buddy Bolden's blues for you.
Well, I thought I heard Buddy Bolden say, "You're nasty, you're dirty, take it away. You're terrible, you're awful, take it away." I thought I heard him say. I thought I heard Buddy Bolden shout, "Open up that window and let the bad air out. Open up that window, let the foul air out." I thought I heard Buddy Bolden say. I thought I heard Judge Fogarty say, 30 days in the market, take him away. Get him a good broom to sweep with, take him away. I thought I heard him say. I thought I heard Frankie Doozen shout, "Gal, give me that money, I'm gonna beat it on out." I mean, give me that money, like I explained to you. I thought I heard Frankie Doozen say.